Screening as part of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival is a short documentary called Expression of Illness. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the writer, director, the person involved in the expression of illness, Bryn Silverman. Bryn, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Hi, Peter. Thank you for having me.
Great to
Yeah.
talk to you, and I'm so intrigued. What made you decide to film this story about your cancer journey?
Yeah, I think that at the baseline, at the heart, it was just this central question of how to come into the identity of a patient. For me, as a younger person being diagnosed with cancer and also being a documentary filmmaker, it was sort of second nature to use film as the medium to work through that, to ask the questions that need to be asked. I mean, even just bringing a recording device to my doctor's offices to like remember the information that they were telling me because it was so overwhelming. And to have the camera as this sort of recording device and witness and kind of testimony after the fact as well really helped me figure out the steps that I needed to go through in order to arrive at where I have in terms of my decision making in healthcare and what were the right steps for me as a thyroid cancer patient.
Aha, how interesting to hear that. Thyroid cancer is, you explained it really well in the film and the treatments. It's obviously quite a process and such a journey for you.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't even know where the thyroid was before I learned that mine was cancerous. And so just understanding the work that that gland does and, the impact that not having one has on the body, regardless of the cancer, just having a thyroidectomy and having it completely removed in the lifetime now with chronic illness, that's a result of that, has really been a whole other chapter that could be its own other film. But yeah, I mean, there have been articles recently out earlier this year about rising rates of cancer in young cis women, and thyroid cancer is one of the fastest in that pool that is rising in my age group. So it's quite alarming. And I think one of the things that kept pushing me forward in making the film was why? Like why women and why is it speeding up? And can we pump money into research to answer some of these questions? And so the impact and awareness I'm hoping that comes out of this film was also part of why I felt like it was important to document my story.
Okay, yeah, no, it's very instructive in that respect. How are you now?
I'm good. In remission. I think I'm coming up on July 31st is my 7 year remission anniversary. But it's
Ah,
really interesting because with thyroid cancer, like our treatment is often very different from what I think the average person understands of cancer therapy. Like we don't do chemo often. It's radioactive iodine is such a targeted, specific post-operative treatment. And so that was something where, even the language we use around thyroid cancer, like I think only up until a couple years ago has the word remission been in the vernacular of thyroid cancer treatment. It used to be that, it's like, well, how are you doing? It's, well, I have really positive outcomes, or like I'm in like the top percent of the outcome positivity. And now we can say remission. So just having that sort of ease, and I think that ease in communication and being able to easily say, like, I am in remission for 7 years. People understand that, but that wasn't the case the entire time that I had gone through my treatments. That's something that has evolved in the healthcare for this specific disease. And I find that really fascinating, objectively. And then subjectively, I find it, quite sad because the language that we use is like the access we have to tell the stories about our lives and who we are and our identities. And something as simple as a word like remission, it's seemingly simple from the outset, but it's actually really, really important and powerful. So long-winded answer, but I am in remission and I'm doing well. And I think I've found a good flow in knowing how to manage my disease.
okay, no, fair enough, and I'm glad to hear that. And I suppose finding the right doctor for diagnosis and for treatment and options, and them allowing themselves to be filmed, was an issue in itself.
Oh, wow. I think I won the lottery in that regard. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. When we talk about in the States, healthcare disparities, Kentucky is suffering from a lot of inequity and underfunding. And I live in Louisville, and honestly, I just like my primary care provider is just a very unique person who immediately was on board and supportive, and I think also saw art as a healing modality. And so when I approached her initially with this film, I think it was like her lack of ego about it was, in hindsight, like shocking and like heroic in my mind, because she just allowed me to film appointments for almost 2 years, maybe 2+ years. And then my endocrinologist, which is the other, primary doctor in a thyroid cancer journey, similarly, I think was just really on board. And I think I've learned more in hindsight how unusual that actually is. And then some of the access to the doctors, like with the American Thyroid Association, they've been really supportive and have actually come on board the project as impact supporters. So they're helping with disseminating the film, connecting me to providers in their network all over the world. And that I think I also got lucky because I just wrote one of the head of, I think he was the president of the ATA at the time, Dr. Victor Burnett, who's at the Mayo Clinic, and he saw the value in film as a healing modality and as a teaching tool and as, positive for awareness of this disease. And so immediately brought me in and was like, welcome to the thyroid world. These are my friends. And it was extraordinary. And I also think as a patient who's also a filmmaker, I was wielding a certain amount of privilege in that respect because not all patients will have that kind of access to their doctors or even, that education about how to interview someone, which is essentially what we're doing in doctors' offices. We're like,
Mm.
they have information and we need it. And so using that skill set in those spaces, I found was a really interesting intersection of like my life up until that point. And so I think it was a bit of luck and also some of my training and the way that it sort of helped keep me going and keep me through.
Okay, how interesting to hear all that. Tell me about other films you've made, and in this film, your use of handheld camera and music and so on.
Oh yeah. Well, I hate tripods.
Mm.
I think they get in the way of the moment.
Yeah.
Setting them up, carrying them around. I understand their value and I respect people who use them, but I do not love them.
Mm.
I've always loved the sort of I think for my own process, I've always loved the kind of run and gun, scrappy. I'm not precious about camera. I'm not precious about image quality. I feel most precious about story and editing and storytelling and and coverage. And I have an editor brain and work as an editor often. And so I think we had 60+ days of footage for this short film, and I just spent over a year working through it and editing and writing and rewriting. And I really enjoy that process. And so the form for me is sometimes less important than what I'm trying to piece together and what it is I'm trying to tell. And that I have sort of a history and a practice of doing that. And for a long time, I produced a personal autobiographical series that was sort of a recap of every year, but it was really intentional and felt like short films in their own right. And it was something that I was like really beholden to for a decade. And I brought a lot of that into this film, into Expression of Illness, that it was this sort of like way of shooting without a goal and then at the end of the process piecing it all together and learning from the footage what it was I wanted to say. It feels like almost like a video journal technique in a lot of ways. And so though this is like maybe more narrative than those projects, it feels inspired by them, and that flows into the music as well. So we worked with Matthew Robert Cooper, who's a composer based out of Portland, Oregon, And I had used one of his tracks. I listened to a lot of him when I was in college over a decade ago. And there was one of his tracks that I just kept using in temp. And I was like, man, I just like really love this track. And like, where is this guy? And who is he? And I wrote him, I just cold wrote him. And it turns out he grew up in Louisville, where I live. And I'm from Portland, Oregon, which is where he lives now.
Mm.
So it was this moment of like we swapped places and had such a beautiful time working with him and just a really symbiotic way of connecting with the material and how to what we were seeing and what we wanted to feel and how we wanted it to progress. And so it was a real it was just a real treat to work with him. He's a wonderful composer. And yeah.
Oh, well done on all that. What made you decide to call the film Expression of Illness?
Yeah, this is interesting. So I'd been calling it a thyroid story for a long time as a temp title. And I was having a conversation with my partner who's in the film, Naveen, my partner and caregiver, who also shot the film and is, my ride or die. And at one point we were talking about the way, like the language that's used when people say like how a disease expresses itself. Like they talk about like disease expression. Like they say, how does that cancer express? And what they mean is like, what are the symptoms? What is it doing? What's its behavior? And I was like, what if we flip that? And it's like, this is my expression of illness. It's like my disease did this thing. That's how it expressed, but this is how I want to express. So I don't know. I don't know if people like get that from the title. Did you get that from the title? Did you interpret that from it?
To some extent, I did. Yes, yes.
Okay.
The way you express the disease and how it impacts you and so on. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's pulled from medical language, like
Yeah.
about disease expression. Yeah. So we started using that title and then it stuck.
Okay. Very
Hmm.
good. And
Hmm.
you already alluded to the editing issues because, as you said, you had so much footage and so much. So, making those decisions about turning it into a 21-minute short film in the editing process must have been quite a task for you.
It was quite a task, not only because we had so much footage to work through, but I think also I had to get over hearing myself and seeing myself on screen. I had to at some point, and that maybe took 6 months. Like I started editing feeling like this may never see the light of day, and that's maybe fine. And I'm just doing this for myself. And I think lowering the stakes in that way of what it needed to do and where it needed to be shown helped me continue to work on it. Because then I was like, all right, well, I'm just doing this for me in my living room. So um, I can experiment. I can try this. I can be vulnerable. Like no one's gonna see it. And then kind of arriving to this place where I was like, oh wow, it's a movie. Like it's working. And I think that is sort of the magic in an edit. It's like chaos until that one day. And you're like, I did it. It's a movie now. And then from that point onwards, it was just about tweaking and getting feedback throughout the entire process, but getting fine cut notes and knowing that we were on the right track.
Okay. The film, I gather, has screened elsewhere, and I'm wondering what reactions you've received.
Yeah, it's been really moving to screen the film in different places. I mean, we haven't Melbourne was our international premiere, which was I wish I could have been there in person to see how, it's received, but here in the States, it's really kind of been astounding to me, like the reach that it's having in terms of emotional scope. We had our first public screening was actually semi-private, and the film wasn't even quite finished yet, but it was pretty far along. And it was at Gilda's Club, which is a cancer resource center that's around the US, I think some parts of maybe Europe, but um, it was kind of like I wanted to see how it was landing with people before we locked. And I was nervous, obviously, for all the reasons, but I think in that space, primarily because I didn't know how it would land for other cancer patients. As a thyroid cancer survivor, it often feels like we're in this other, we're over here and like the rest of the cancer patients are over here and we have very different experiences. And it was just not the case. Like, people of all walks of life and varying, diseases just felt like they saw themselves in my story. And I think that has been the most impactful part of this entire experience for me. And
Mm.
now it's like even expanded beyond cancer patients, that it almost seems like people who have had any sort of, you know, what's the word? I mean, anyone who's been a patient who's had to like struggle with some sort of illness or confronted the American medical system, which is a very specific place, has some sort of, they take something from it, whether it's like the confusion of finding where your doctor's office is or not knowing where to park or having to now deal with chronic illness. I think that's been really touching. And, I mentioned the rising thyroid cancer rates. Every audience, there's at least two or three people who come up to me and maybe they haven't had thyroid cancer, but like their best friend or their parents have. And it's every time without fail. And then if we're talking about thyroid disease generally, it's like 1 in 5 people in that room are coming up to me saying, I have an overactive thyroid, I have an underactive thyroid. So we're clearly dealing with a large, large issue here. And it seems like with every screening, I'm seeing a sample pool of just how predominant, like just how like widespread this issue really is.
Mm. Okay, well done on that and for making the film. I'm wondering, Bryn, are there any particular films or filmmakers that might
Mhm.
inspire you in terms of your approach to your filmmaking style
Yeah,
or story? Yeah.
Yeah, I love Petra Costa's work.
Ah,
And yeah, and I love the way that she moves through the world. I love her movie Elena was a big inspiration for this film. I love that she's in her work, but it's not always on screen. I think that she is so smart and her sensibilities I admire so much. And then Elaine Sheldon, who's based out of Tennessee and she recently did King Cole. She would be another filmmaker who I really admire the way that she like moves within the industry and that the work that she makes always seems to be like really tender and close to heart.
okay. Oh, they're good examples. All right. So, Bryn, are you working on other projects at the moment?
I am. I am in late post-production on another short. And this one's called North Star. And it follows a team of researchers in a small town in Ohio. And they unpack the legacy and the true story of their hometown's greatest export, which is Annie Oakley, the world famous Wild West sharpshooter. And so it's this story about, on the one hand, it's Annie's biopic and like the wild life, that she lived in her incredible career as an athlete, essentially. And then on the other hand, it's a story about these three elderly women in this like new season of their lives as researchers who are like the arbiters of Annie's legacy. And we see how like Annie is in them. We almost see like the living impact of her legacy through these women in Ohio at this museum. So we're really close to being done with that one. So keep a lookout for that project.
I will. It might be in next year's Melbourne Documentary Film Festival.
I would love it.
Uh, Bryn, it's been great talking to you. We've been speaking to Bryn Silverman, who's the director of the short film Expression of Illness, which is now screening as part of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. Bryn, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Okay, all the best.
You as
Bye
well. Bye.
bye.